Tansy.
And I think that, so what do you wish me to do now?
Well, what I'm interested in is just getting you to run through the films that you have.
Well, you want me to name the film and then tell a little about it? Is that it?
Yep. But let me just hold a second because my dog.
Here somewhere, the brochure for it. I don't know. I don't have them all out. But, you know, you tell me what you want me to do, and then I can.
Well, what I'd like to have is a encapsulation of the films. You know your.
Well, this is in sound, I gather.
I hope so. Yep.
Yeah.
But your most important films are, of course, but the ones that you'd like to show to people. I'm not so sure the Florentine films, or maybe some of the Florentine films you'd like to show.
Some of the Florentine films are very important.
But the films, you know, just off the top of your head, as you see them, you know, and looking back at them, and how you'd like to show them, if you could show them to somebody, if you could show them to an audience.
Well, I mean, if I was doing they did film festivals on me, for instance, in Cranbrook and some other places. Now, certain films were chosen there to exemplify certain things, you know.
Yeah.
So, but if are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I made a series of films on in Italy, particularly in Florence, on the Tuscan architecture and painting, and the names of the films are important in a way because they involve certain specific places. For instance, they have the Davids of Florence, and there I chose the four Davids, which are the most important ones, and people, when they go there, tourists are always wanting, of course, to see the Michelangelo David, the big one. But there are two or three others that are also important, so what I tried to do was to give the significance of the Davids to Florence as a city. And that was most important to the Florentines, what David represented to them, which was a small person fighting the larger state and larger country. So then, of course, Michelangelo and the Medici Chapel, that's another film which was very interesting because I was given permission to, in my stocking feet, to actually walk all over the Michelangelo sculptures, and I could be in back of them, point the camera down, or in back of them, or around them, and whatever. But I was in my stocking feet, and so this gave a very excellent idea of the way Michelangelo actually carved the stone. The Florentine workshop of the Pietro Dura is important. That is a little known museum and workshop which was commenced by Cosimo Primo, and it was made, he created it to actually create the working of the hard stones, which is what Pietro Dura means, for the building of the Medici chapels and also the various altarpieces in the churches around in Italy. And that workshop still goes today, using the same tools that were used when it first started to create the stone, but they only do now just repair jobs. They don't do original work in particular. Basilica of San Lorenzo is the personal church of the Medicis, which is cat-a-corner to the Medici Palazzo, and that was designed by Brunelleschi. I was very interested in doing that because Brunelleschi is, of course, the great architect of the Renaissance, or I should say one of them, and he created, of course, the dome on the Duomo. He was able to solve that problem. But he also built this church, and I believe never lived to see it completed, but he did draw up the plans for it and do the actual site planning. And of course, in the interiors are the great masterpieces of Donatello, the two altars, the two choir stalls, not altars. And they have been there since Donatello created them. The Cantoria della Luca Robbia is in black and white, and that is not such an important film, but it does give a very close-up view of those very realistically carved choir screens of the Della Robbia. Florentine architecture of the Renaissance is a fine film, because there I tried to bring together the highlights of the various types of architecture that varied or progressed from, of course, the medieval through the Gothic and into the classic of the Renaissance. The Cathedral and Baptistery of Florence is an interesting film. It was very difficult to film because it's such a vast cathedral. However, by certain use of the camera, I was able to, and through use of still pictures and then rephotographing them, I was able to give this sense of the immensity of this vast cathedral, and also to introduce the Luca della Robbias, and there again to have a very personal meeting with Michelangelo's famous Pietà. There again I was able to get in my stocking feet and walk around it and over it and so on and photograph it very closely. Siena, very lovely city, entirely different than, of course, than Florence, and this film has its own ambience. It contains not only the beautiful piazza in the center, which is so famous for the very famous horse race, but also it has in the architecture that was used there, it's very particular to Siena, and so I was able to get permission to work both inside the church and outside of it, and also in the baptistry, where again there are the baptismal font is done by Donatello. And Donatello did this particular piece late in life when he returned from Padua and was working once again in Florence. And history has it that while he was also working on the two pulpits that are in San Lorenzo, he was also working on this baptistry font in Siena. Basilica of Santa Croce and the Pazzi Chapel, an immense church again, Gothic church this time, and contains the various chapels that house the burial places of such people as Michelangelo and the various important people of Florence. Supposedly also of Dante, but actually he is not, I think, buried there. The important things in this cathedral are the wonderful frescoes by Giotto, and also the Pazzi Chapel, which is in the cloisters, designed again by Brunelleschi. And here is an example of the height to which the Renaissance architecture arose, because the whole symmetry of the place is very, very beautiful. I was able to climb up all over the roof inside the dome, and there even the Italian who was with me and I discovered a date which was scrawled by one of the workmen in there when they were building it. In the rotunda of this chapel are some tondos by again Donatello. The Francois vase is a very famous vase discovered by a Frenchman by the name of Francois, who was prowling around in Italy and uncovered this tomb in which he discovered these fragments of a vase, and he put them together, and in being able to do the scholarship on it, was able to discover that the vase was originally Greek vase, and then was bought by an Etruscan and brought to Italy. And then when this Etruscan personage died, was then put in his tomb, or in their tomb, his and her tomb. And it's a very handsome vase, which when Francois put it back together, he had an artist to paint in the fragments that were missing, which was unfortunate. But it's banded, and it's a story of Achilles and the story of Troy. And about the turn of the century, some mad Italian came in and for some unknown reason picked up the vase and threw it on the ground and smashed it again. So this was fortunate in a way, because the vase, when it was put back together, all the fragments which were not the original painting were left out. So now it is in its original state, minus those pieces which were originally missing. And I was able to bring a camera up within 4 inches of it. I have a very close lens, and so I turned the vase very slowly and was able to tell the story of Achilles. And it's a very unusual film, and strangely enough, this was one of the first of my films that was bought by the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Let's see.
Is that the end of the
Pardon?
That's the end of the Florentine films?
Well, there's the Romanesque churches in northern Italy, which is interesting, but there's not necessary to go into that. But that really winds up, in a sense, the Florentine film. And
who commissioned these films? Majority.
Well, it was my own company. I did that. I put it together and speculated on speculation.
I see.
Yeah, and then I had a distributor. There was these were the first films on art that were made that I know of after Flaherty's films that he made, like A Man of Erin, and then he made a film called The Titan, which actually was made by the Germans who went into Italy, to Florence, and shot thousands of black and white feet of Florence and about the Michelangelos. And then for some reason they either ran out of money or got discouraged or whatever. So Flaherty bought all this footage and cut it down to an hour-and-a-half film, which he edited and called The Titan. And it was a film about Michelangelo. And it was very, very good. And that was one really that inspired me to get started. So that was the only film that I knew of that would go on. So there were no distributors in this country and that I knew of, and I finally went to New York, and there was a woman by the name of Rosalind Kazoff who was distributing films that were about something. But she didn't have anything on art. She had things on music and on drama, and a very limited audience, and the one that didn't cater to a vast group of people at all. But the Encyclopedia Britannica in Chicago was also making films at that time, but they were doing scientific films and things that related to the encyclopedia. So I had made a film called Time, Form, and Color. And at that time I was teaching anatomy and life drawing along with painting at Cranbrook Academy, and So my students were unable to grasp the idea of negative and positive space. In other words, negative space and positive space, and they couldn't understand this. So I decided to make a film on it, and I got 3 or 4 different models, nude models, and I got a camera and started in, not knowing anything about it, the camera, and I photographed these people in a way so that you you couldn't really tell they were nudes. I photographed the negative and positive spaces, and then I edited the film so one part flowed into another. And then I got a friend of mine to write some poetry and read it, and along with some music, and put together what I think is still a very interesting little film. And I sent this to her, and she loved this film, and she said, well, whatever you can give me now, I want to distribute. So that's actually how I got started. And then she eventually had many of my films, and then sold out to a fellow in Chicago, and he had my films for a number of years, and then he started ripping me off, and so I had to withdraw all of them. But unfortunately, I had let him talk me into making the original from my original to make the internegs in New York at his laboratory. So on Nash, when I made the 3 films on Nash, and he kept those. And then when he was ripping me off, I tried to get them back, and I got back only 2 of them, and he still has 1 of them. So I mean, I could sue him, but it wouldn't do much good. But then there are also a film called Time, Form, and Color. And that was made on the island on Ossabaw. And there I created the ambience of not the beach, but the time flow of the beach. And this, you understand, was done some 40 years ago, I think, 30, 40, 35 years ago. So all this meant that you were creating with a camera, more or less on the spot, and then working out the essence of it after the fact, so to speak. That's an interesting film. That's in color. Then Millis, I was very close to Carl Millis, and while he was alive, I was never able to photograph. I hadn't gotten into it then. But after he died, I went around with the black and white camera and made 2 films on him. And one is called The Fountain of Faith, and the other is called The Fountains of Carl Millis. And those are nice black and white films. Then I have here a film on Arnold Blanche, and it's called Creative Journey. He was a very important artist. He's not much heard of today, but he was one of the kingpins in Woodstock, New York, where I also had a studio. So I wanted to make this film about him. He's a very photogenic fellow and really very fine teacher, and I think a pretty fair painter. And I wanted to show him in the ambience of Woodstock, New York, and although there's not really a lot of people in it, it's just mainly about Arnold, but it's about how he was and how he worked and existed in a artist ambience that is gone now. There are no more like that. Edvard Munch, paintings and graphics, 2 films that I went to Norway to make, and they have worked out very well. Munch has always appealed to me. He had never been filmed before. There'd been no films made on it, and so the museum there gave me permission, carte blanche, to do what I wanted. I lived in the museum, had access to everything, plates, drawings, everything, and even his outdoor studio. And I made I made all the footage, and then I brought it back and put it together in 2 separate things, because his graphics are one thing and these paintings are another. Then I made then another Norwegian artist of German extraction. He's actually German by the name of Rolf Nash, a very important printmaker. Saw my Munch film, so he invited me to come to Norway to make a film on him because he loved the Munch films, and so I went to Norway and I made 3 films on him. One on his masterpiece, which is this vast mural that he did in china and glass and all kinds of brass and copper materials. That is in a public building in Oslo, and then one on his prints and one on what is called the Visit to All, where is A-L, All, it's up in middle Norway, where he lived and worked. And there is Nash himself in this film and his lovely wife, who is an actress, Ragna Held by name, and the two of them together are like a couple of lovebirds, and they were wonderful people. I really loved working with them. I don't know if I would have gotten along with Munch, but I think I would have. I missed him by very little because he died in '44, and if I'd been onto it then, I could have been over there and gotten him.
What year did you make the Munch film?
I was afraid you'd ask me about these. I think it was, well, I told you, didn't I, the Israeli War, the 6-Day War. Remember, I was in a museum filming Munch then. So that would have been, 76? 66? Yeah, no, it's the Israeli War, I remember that. Then, my background is such that as a boy, I had no running water, no electricity, no automobiles, no nothing, because I grew up in the far west, or not the far west, but in Colorado, and it was very rugged, hard life, and so I loved what happened, milking the cows and harnessing the horses, and there were no amenities of life, and I had to walk a mile to school in a one-room schoolhouse through the snow, and that is carried through all my life, that quality. And so when I had an opportunity to be with this island, Ossabaw, I worked there for some, I think, 20 years, and it was a pristine, or is a pristine island, as was Hilton Head before Fraser got hold of it and ruined it and sold it off to the moneyed people. So we were able to save it, and also to start a wonderful project there called the Ossabaw Island Project Foundation, to which people from all over the world came, writers, artists, bankers, laborers, you name it. Only criteria for being there was to be able to think creatively. Well, out of that grew, because there was 16 miles of pristine beach, and because there were wild boar and deer and these people that were related to this ambience, these project members, out of that grew these 2 films, which were the first 2 films that I know of that were done on ecology. And one of them is called A Search for Ecological Balance. Untitled film, A Search for Ecological Balance. And the other one isn't on here. I don't remember the name of the other one. But there are 2 films. And both of them were pioneers in their field and are still pertinent to today. I mean, they're right on. The thing they say, the whole thing they're about, the simplicity of them, bango, right on. So that's about it. I'm an authority on Donatello. I've photographed almost all of his work. He is my favorite Renaissance artist. I have vast material on him, and 2 years ago or so, when in '86, on the 400th anniversary of Donatello's birth, I almost had this commissioned by the Detroit Art Institute to make a major film on Donatello. I had all the equipment ready, I had the film, I had everything ready to go, and they had applied for a big grant. And due to certain circumstances beyond their control and my control in the museum field, they were not able to get it, so that fell through. So I still have this project, and I'd still like to do it, because I know more about Donatello than anybody I know, I mean, as a pictorial thing, and a good deal of history-wise, because I have lived Donatello for the last 30 years. So, the end.
That's a good pitch for Donatello. That's great. I don't know, that's really running through it.
Huh?
That's really running through it.
Well, try.
Okay, good.
And then see what things look like and what you conjure up about all that.
It's okay, this is fine. Get closer than that. It's interesting. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
My thirst for not just subject matter, but for people who really had a meaning in terms of the mainstream of art were always very important to me, and I was always looking for them. And I had a very fine lifelong friend by the name of Berthold Tex Schiewitz. The name implies he came from Texas, who was really a very fine sculptor. He's no longer with us, but he came to Cranbrook and worked there for a number of years for Carl Millis, and after Carl died, he actually finished up a number of his pieces. But Tex went on then to do much of his own work and became an instructor in sculpture at Cranbrook. And at that time, I got him to consent to make a film, for me to make a film on him. And I made a black and white film on him, and he was doing a very important commission on a piece of sculpture that went in a park in Philadelphia of a hippopotamus. So I was able to get the quality of Tex, who was a wonderful, gentle person, a wonderful sculptor, marvelous use of his hands, and also a wonderful, wonderful technician. Then I did also, back in Italy, I had a friend who was also a friend of Tex's. And his name was Bruno Biarzi, and he was a world-renowned bronze caster and an authority on bronze. So I felt very strongly that gold and silver and all the other metals had been researched and done about and eulogized to such a great extent, and bronze had never been really thought of, but had always been used. It was the oldest metal. So because Bruno was an authority on it, and at the same time, San Ludovico, which was a great bronze by Donatello, was in the Uffizi being repaired after the great flood in Florence in '66. Bruno being in charge of all the restoration in Florence and most parts of Italy, he was in charge of the restoration of Ludovico. So I had this thought of doing a film about Bruno. He was very reluctant to do this, but he consented. But sort of around Bruno, but also including Ludovico, and then going into a bronze foundry, and then a short history of bronze. So this is what I did. And Bruno actually stood in front of the Ludovico in one of the galleries in the Uffizi, and with all the noise and the bouncing of the sound and everything else, and the gesturing of his hands, he couldn't talk without his hands, a beautiful movement of his hand. He made this film, very successful film. It's a very popular film, and it has a very educational connotation to it because it relates to many fields. Then
That's called.
it's called the River of Bronze.
Okay, can we?
It's called the River of Bronze.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Well, I'm gonna have to take a break because
Yeah.
my battery is gonna be shutting down.
Yeah.
Let's just take another break.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, um, okay. All right. You ready? I had spent a good deal of time in Europe and in Italy making these first films that I did, subsequently called the Treasures of Tuscany. And I had then also done films on individual artists, Nash, Munch, and then and Chiwitz. I've had also a lifelong friend by the name of Harry Bertoia. And Harry had always done very abstract sculpture and prints. And during the time that I knew him, I oftentimes visited his studio in Pennsylvania. And one day when I was there, I happened to see some wires that were anchored to a metal block on the floor. As I went by, I plucked them, I stroked them, and they made a sound. And I said to Harry, this is fantastic. When did you start this? He said, well, I've just been experimenting and put these together, and they do make a sound. And I said, well, do you have others? Oh, yes, he said, I have a number. And I said, well, this would make a very interesting film. And at that time, I was working also on the Arnold Blanche film, The Creative Journey. And so I had this idea of creativity in mind, and I had the creativity in Woodstock, and then suddenly here was the creativity in the abstract, which was Harry. So he agreed to this, and I moved into a house down the way from him that he owned, and a little farmhouse, and we spent several weeks working mostly at night because there were heavy trucks going by during the day. And I created this film. I say I did because I was the I and he was the protagonist of the sound, of working with the various pieces that he had created. And together we decided on the various kinds of levels of sound that we wanted to get. So he took rubber mallets, rubber sledgehammers, hit some of the bigger pieces, stroked them by hand, and I took the microphone and ran up and down them while the sound was being created. And I recorded this all wild on the Nagra, and many hours of this, plus many feet of visuals of, not of him working, but of the sculpture, but particularly of the sculpture in motion, because it's like so many fingers, you pluck them like this, and they move and they hit each other and they make a sound. And this gave to me a whole new idea. But in a sense, to digress a little bit, the beginning of my filmmaking, the beginning of my creative effort in this manner, began, as I mentioned earlier, because my students had no idea of negative and positive space. Well, I'd always thought in the back of my mind that I wanted to make some kind of a film, although I didn't know what kind, where, how, or when. But when I decided on this negative space business, I went out and bought an 8mm camera and began filming little things around with it and looking at them and so on. Very, I assure you, very funny little things. Then, as those improved a little bit, then I invested in a 16mm film camera and made 16mm mistakes. So then finally decided that it was time to take some time off, and what I wanted really to do was to go to Europe, and since I'd always loved the Renaissance and Michelangelo and Brunelleschi, Donatello and so on, that I wanted to try and photograph them. And Bruno Biarzi, as I spoke of before, was instrumental in getting me permission. So I spent this long, cold winter photographing wild and wildly all over Florence and Tuscany. And then I had about 30,000 feet of raw film, not raw film, but exposed film, of all of this subject matter that I had in my mind, that I knew from one thing to another that I had done that led to another. And I brought this back, and I had nothing to edit it with. I had no equipment, and I had really no idea of how or what I wanted to, how I wanted to put it together. So I went to the University of Michigan and suggested to the head of the department there, the art history department, look, here's all this film, you're a Renaissance man, now let's get together and we'll put together this new media, because there had been no films made on art before this. So a week later I went back, and hopefully thinking, well, he'd be wild about this and think it was wonderful, and he looked at me and he said, well, he said, if you leave it with us, maybe we could get maybe 15 minutes of film out of this 30,000 if you leave it with us. Well, this hit me like a bombshell. And I thought, my God, this guy is an art historian, and he's mad because he's not really oriented to art. He's oriented only to the idea of the art history, and the idea of himself in relation to art history. It has nothing to do with what I'm about, because I felt that the camera was an extension of my own body, an extension of the paintbrush, extension of my thought process. And so I said, give me the film. I got it all back, the originals, and I went home, bought editing equipment, and then I proceeded in the next year to make all the mistakes known to man, woman, and child, because there was no book, I had not studied, and I had no criterion for any of it except my own eye, my own heart, my own idea about what I wanted to do. And so Harry, in this sense, was the perfect foil for this, because when I finished his film, he had no idea what I'd done. I took the soundtrack, the sound that we'd made, and the raw film, or the exposed film, And I took it back to Bloomfield and went into the dark, and then I put the sound together and edited the film and had it printed, and then I took it to Harry and showed it, and he cried. And he said, "This is so beautiful." He said, "I had no idea that my work had this dimension to it." Well, this is exactly what I speak of, because the fact that I was turned off by the University of Michigan, not as an individual, but just because of the whole ambience of the profession, and because of this new kind of thing that came along. And here I was, like Alice in Wonderland, because I had nowhere to go except to follow my own instincts and to use my own sensibilities about my vision, about my feeling for art, and about my knowledge of how these things were formed. So I took, I have a painting here, and I can show you a little bit. One of the things I did that turned people off was that when I took the camera, I didn't put it back on a tripod here and say, photograph this so. I said, well, what is the important thing about this work of art here, this painting? I said, well, it's so and so. So I said, well, you know, there's a red spot here. I think this would be interesting. So I come up here with the camera, and I come in on this red spot, and I focus on that, and then handheld, I move back with my body this way and move away from this, and then I might become intrigued with the bird, the hand leading to there, then a relationship of the head. Why? Because there's not just necessarily the flow of this, but the intellectual meaning of it, and so on, down through the form, negative, positive space. I might move all around it, but I might move also this way with the camera, so that the canvas is fractured, and you get a sense of feeling this way. Because I think when people go into a museum, that they don't stand in front of a picture this way and they look at it and say, ah, good painting or bad. They want to come up like this, and they want to see it. They want to look, and they look like this, and then they come over here and they look. Well, this is a camera, and so this is what I did with it. Now, when I painted this, I painted this way. I painted this way. I moved all over. You see, so like this, you have a certain body action. Now, Donatello, when he did a piece of sculpture, he looked at it this way. He turned sideways. He looked so, like this. Then with a camera, I tried to give this sense of rhythm, of balance, of the whole motion of life, so that it is not a reproduction of what you see, but in a sense, a reproduction of what you come to know by seeing. Okay? So it's as simple as that. Okay?
Yep.
I'll take the other one now. It's easier. Sorry, I don't have a frame for that. I can crank that easel up a little bit if you want. See?
Oh no, I can sit down.
Huh?
That's fine.
You want to sit down?
It's not a very...
You want something to rest your arms on?
No. Well, there it is.
Can you move out from the eyes, because they're very riveting, you know.
Move out from him?
I mean, zero in so that you have this expression, and move out so that you get the whole face, because it's very riveting, that look in your eye.
Yeah, I can try close up. Oh, he's kind of an odd fellow, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think the figure in the doorway and that look, you see, the tilt of your head, the alertness there is very interesting, because, as I said, you know there's someone there, and you can take that along if you want to have others of that.